the other lives lost yesterday. We lost more than Belle yesterday. And one thing that gives me a sliver of encouragement is the fact that Belle was surrounded yesterday by her church family that she loved fiercely, and vice versa. Our church was not comprised of members or parishioners. We were a very close family. We ate together, we laughed together, we cried together, and we worshiped together. Now most of our church family is gone. Our building is probably beyond repair. And the few of us that are left behind lost tragically yesterday. As senseless as this tragedy was, our sweet Belle would not have been able to deal with losing so much family yesterday. Please don't forget Sutherland Springs.
I don't understand, but I know my God does, and that's where I'll leave that.
The Holcomb family lost 8 family members that day. An associate pastor, 60-year-old Brian Holcomb, was one of the 2 members that were killed outside of the church. He was on his way to lead the church in prayer before his life was tragically taken. 58-year-old Carla Holcomb, Brian's wife, was killed inside the church while she waited for her husband to come inside. Mark Daniel Holcomb, who everyone called Danny, was 36 years old when he was killed along with his 17-month-old daughter, Noah Grace. Crystal and John Holcomb attended church with their entire family. Crystal was a widower before she married John, and she had 4 children from her previous marriage, while John and Crystal had a child together, with another on the way. Crystal was 4 months pregnant when she was shot and killed. Her unborn child lost his life as well. 3 of the 5 children lost their lives: 9-year-old Megan Hill, 11-year-old Emily Hill, and 13-year-old Greg Hill. John survived as well as 2 of their 5 children, although John was injured when he was grazed by shrapnel. John's father, Joe, lost children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren on that horrendous day. Shawnee and Robert Corrigan were high school sweethearts that were originally from Harrison, Michigan, and they were both 51 years old. Robert, or Bob, Bobby to his friends, and Shawnee had been married for over 30 years and loved each other just as much as the day they were married as the day they were taken from this world. While in high school, Bob was a track star and graduated as valedictorian of his class. After graduation, he joined the Air Force, where he served for 29 years. Shawnee followed Bob as he moved around the country to different Air Force bases. The couple had 3 handsome boys that they showered with unconditional love. Less than 1 year before Shawnee and Bob's death, Pastor Frank Pomeroy presided over their son's funeral after he tragically committed suicide. Their other 2 sons are both active-duty military. A few years before the attack, Bob decided to retire from the Air Force. He was a chief master sergeant and the superintendent at the hospital located on the Air Force base. Shawnee and Bob were also very gifted musically. Bob wrote his own songs and played guitar, while Shawnee had, what some say, the voice of an angel. Keith Allen Braden was a 62-year-old man who also enjoyed attending the church, especially with his wife Debbie. Keith worked in the dairy department of a local grocery store, and previously served for the Army National Guard. His older brother Bruce said Keith was always joking around and loved children. Keith and Debbie raised 3 children, who are now all adults and have children of their own. Debbie and their 6-year-old granddaughter were both injured in the shooting, and both have undergone many different surgeries. Debbie was shot a total of 3 times, while their granddaughter was shot in the hip. Sutherland Springs, Texas, is a very small town. In 2017, it had a population of only 600 people. The town was founded in the mid-1800s by a man named Dr. John Sutherland, Jr., who was a pioneer citizen. He set up a post office and a stagecoach shop in 1851. Due to the natural springs, it quickly became a resort-style town. In 1910, a hotel opened called Hotel Sutherland. The hotel had 52 rooms, a swimming pool, and a bathhouse which were all fed by the local springs. The hotel was a resort that catered especially to the wealthy. The town was quite isolated and could only be accessed by train. In 1913, the Chibolo River flooded, causing a lot of damage to the small town. Some of the businesses there never did recover from the damage. The hotel closed its doors for good in 1923. Sutherland Springs is located on U.S. Highway 54 and, as of 2016, has 2 churches, a general store, a community center, a post office, and a history museum. As previously mentioned, this attack at the First Baptist Church wasn't motivated by racism or religion, but shockingly, by an ongoing family dispute. While we don't know the exact specifics of this feud, we do know that Jeff and his mother-in-law did not get along, nor see eye to eye. Born on February 12, 1991, Jeff grew up in New Braunfels, Texas, and graduated from New Braunfels High School in 2009 with 393 other students. He had a long disciplinary history at school, complete with 7 suspensions. Some of the things he was suspended over were falsifying records, insubordination, profanity, and a drug-related offense. The students that he grew up with would later say that Jeff was an outcast in school, but wouldn't classify him as a loner since he did hang out with other outcasts. He started getting picked on when he was younger, so he decided to sign up for martial arts to help protect himself from bullies. After graduation, Jeff decided to enlist in the Air Force. He served in logistics at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico from 2009 to 2014. On January 5, 2019, he officially entered active military service. He went to basic training at the Joint Base in San Antonio, Lackland, Texas. Much like his school history, Jeff's Air Force discipline history was also quite lengthy. He racked up numerous minor infractions, as well as a couple major infractions. Jeff began dating his first wife in February of 2011, and they got married on April 12, 2011. On February 21, 2012, Jeff walked into a mental health center. He was upset that his wife left him, and he was having suicidal thoughts. The doctors gave him some medication and sent him on his way. Just one day later, on February 22, 2012, Jeff returned to the mental health center because he was feeling suicidal again. The doctors decided he needed to be admitted, and he was placed into inpatient treatment from February 23, 2012, until March 8, 2012. He was diagnosed with adjustment disorder and depressed mood. A few months later, in June 2012, Jeff was back at inpatient treatment. At one point, while he was still in the mental health center, he escaped from the center and was caught 10 miles away at a bus station. He was brought back to the center where he stayed for several more weeks. In June of 2011, his wife reported that Jeff assaulted her by grabbing her throat, choking her, throwing her up against the wall, slapping her, kicking her, and dragging her through the house. He also assaulted his stepson and fractured the toddler's skull. Jeff wasn't charged with the assault on his wife and stepson until October of 2012, and he was officially convicted of the assault on November 7, 2012. Between the time that the assault occurred and the time of the conviction, Jeff's wife filed for divorce, which was finalized on October 17, 2012. After the assault, Jeff was charged with 4 different crimes, 6 counts in all. He was charged with the assault on his wife, aggravated assault on his stepson, 2 counts of pointing a loaded gun at his wife, and 2 counts of pointing an unloaded gun at his wife. He pled guilty to the assaults on his wife and his stepson, and the weapons charges being dismissed. Jeff was sentenced to 12 months of confinement, and his rank was dropped to Airman Basic. Then he was discharged from the Air Force because of the assault charges, and, as a result, he should have been forbidden from purchasing any sort of firearms. Unfortunately, the Air Force failed to register this conviction, so when a background search was performed on Jeff when he purchased the firearms, his criminal history check came back as clear. He was dismissed from the Air Force in 2014 with a bad conduct charge. After leaving the Air Force, Jeff moved back to New Braunfels with his parents. He lived on their property in a converted barn. On April 4th, 2014, Jeff married his second wife. Not long after their wedding, the newlyweds moved to Colorado Springs in Colorado. While in Colorado Springs, Jeff was charged with animal cruelty. He was suspected of beating his malnourished husky. He was given a deferred sentence, where he had to pay restitution, as well as fines and costs. He was sentenced to serve 18 months of probation. In March of 2016, the charge was dismissed because Jeff paid his restitution, fines, and costs, and successfully completed his probation. Jeff and his wife only lived in Colorado for a short time, until they decided to move back to New Braunfels. The two of them moved back into the converted barn on his parents' property. Jeff worked odd jobs here and there. At one point, he lied about his background and received a job with the Texas Department of Public Safety as a security officer. He worked as a security guard at the Summit Vacation and RV Resort in New Braunfels. Guests at the park would later comment on how creepy Jeff was, and how he always seemed to be angry. After working at the RV park, Jeff took a job at the Schlitterbahn water park and resort, but he was fired less than 6 weeks after accepting the job.
His mom's an angel, and his dad was very caring. I mean, they did everything that they could to give him a good life, and they offered to pay for him to go to school, and he chose to go in the Air Force. Oh yeah, most definitely. He just had no regard for anybody else except for himself.
Jeff and his second wife welcomed a child in 2015, and their second child in 2017. The feud between his mother-in-law, which was his second wife's mother, continued throughout their entire relationship. He threatened her if he thought she was interfering with his life, and forbade her from visiting the hospital where her own grandchildren were born. For a short time, only about a month, Jeff attended the First Baptist Church with his wife and her family. Not long after attending the church, he started preaching about atheism on social media, and he laughed during church sermons. While on social media, he told people they were stupid if they believed in God. The thought behind the attack was that Jeff's wife grew up in the First Baptist Church, and everyone she and her mother loved would be there. He was determined to take the lives of anyone and everyone that meant something to his wife and her mother. Fortunately, Jeff's mother-in-law was not at the church on the day of the attack, or she definitely would have lost her life.
The suspect's mother-in-law attended this church. We know that he had made threatening texts from him.
To say that the Air Force dropped the ball would be an understatement. It was reported that the Air Force failed to follow protocol 6 different times when it came to Jeff and his cases. He should have never been able to pass a background check, which allowed him to purchase the firearms. In 2018, the family of one of the victims filed a lawsuit against the Air Force for negligence.
An administrative error. That's what investigators say allowed the shooter to legally purchase weapons. The Air Force failing to follow a Pentagon rule that says the FBI should have been notified of a domestic assault charge on his record.
It's been over 2 years since the Sutherland Springs shooting, and investigators are still unable to unlock Jeff's phone, which could hold many more answers as to why the attack took place. This has been an ongoing dispute between the FBI and law enforcement, and the phone companies, especially Apple. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Make sure to also check us out on social media. We have a newly formed discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Active Shooter, the podcast discussion group. You can also find us on Instagram at Active the Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Active. For just $1 a month, you can get access to ad-free episodes, early release episodes, and a shout-out on the show. Just go to www.patreon.com/active the podcast. Thank you, and be safe.